The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Prince William walked briskly toward the main gates. His face was stern, his jaw set in determination. The royal guard stood at attention, their red uniforms crisp and their bearskin hats perfectly positioned. They had served the crown faithfully for years, but today something was different. Captain James Morrison, a decorated veteran with 20 years of service, noticed the prince's unusual demeanor immediately. The other guards sensed it too. There was tension in the air that hadn't been there before. Prince William approached the formation with purposeful steps, his hands clasped behind his back. "Gentlemen," Prince William began, his voice carrying across the courtyard with unusual gravity, "your service to the crown has been noted and recorded. However, effective immediately, you are all dismissed from your duties as royal guard." The words hit like a thunderbolt. Captain Morrison's eyes widened in shock. The younger guards exchanged confused glances. This was unprecedented. The royal guard had protected the monarchy for centuries. Never in living memory had an entire unit been dismissed so abruptly. "Sir, may I ask the reason for this decision?" Captain Morrison stepped forward, his voice respectful but clearly stunned. Prince William's expression remained unchanged. "The decision has been made at the highest levels. You will receive your final pay and documentation by week's end. Your replacements will arrive within the hour." The guard stood in stunned silence. Some had dedicated their entire adult lives to this service. Their families had served the crown for generations. The dismissal felt like a betrayal of everything they believed in. As Prince William turned to leave, whispers began among the dismissed guards. They had heard rumors in recent weeks about budget cuts and modernization plans, but nothing had prepared them for this moment. The palace had been their home, their purpose, their identity. Within minutes, word spread throughout the palace staff. Housekeepers, kitchen staff, and administrators stopped their work to discuss the shocking news. The royal guard dismissal was already becoming the biggest scandal to hit the palace in years. Private security contractors began arriving at the palace gates, just as Prince William had promised. They wore modern tactical gear instead of traditional uniforms. Their approach was efficient but lacked the ceremonial dignity that had defined royal protection for centuries. The dismissed guards were escorted to collect their personal belongings. Many had tears in their eyes as they removed their ceremonial swords and handed over their badges. Captain Morrison looked back at the palace one final time, knowing that his family's three-generation legacy of royal service was ending in disgrace. Local news reporters, somehow alerted to the unusual activity at the palace, began gathering outside the gates. The story was already spreading beyond the palace walls, and the public reaction was beginning to build. As the day progressed, the full weight of the decision became clear to everyone involved. This wasn't just about changing security protocols. This was about tradition, honor, and the very foundation of what it meant to serve the British crown. The consequences of this decision would ripple far beyond anyone's expectations. The news of the Royal Guard dismissal spread like wildfire through London's media circles. By evening, every major news outlet was running the story as their lead headline. Social media exploded with outrage from British citizens who viewed the Royal Guard as a sacred symbol of their heritage. Sarah Bennett, a BBC royal correspondent, stood outside Buckingham Palace delivering her report to millions of viewers. This unprecedented decision by Prince William has shocked the nation. The Royal Guard has protected British royalty since 1660. Their dismissal represents a dramatic break from centuries of tradition. Inside the palace, Queen Elizabeth's private secretary, Sir David Henderson, rushed to inform her of the developing crisis. The Queen, now in her late 90s, listened with growing concern as he explained the situation. Her hands trembled slightly as she processed the magnitude of what had occurred. "How could this happen without my knowledge?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sir David had no answers. The decision appeared to have been made without consulting the proper channels or following established protocols. Meanwhile, Captain Morrison and his fellow dismissed guards gathered at a local pub near the palace. The atmosphere was somber as they discussed their uncertain futures. Many had no other skills or career prospects outside of royal service. Their military pensions were modest, and finding new employment at their age would be challenging. 20 years of my life," Morrison said, staring into his pint of beer. "My father served before me and his father before him. We protected the crown through wars, terrorist threats, and political upheavals. Now we're cast aside like we never mattered. The younger guards were particularly devastated. Private Thomas Mitchell, only 25 years old, had joined the Royal Guard straight from military service. His dream of serving the crown for decades had been shattered in a single morning. Back at the palace, the new private security team was already causing problems. Their lack of familiarity with royal protocols became evident during the evening ceremonial duties. They positioned themselves incorrectly during the changing of the guard ceremony, confusing tourists and embarrassing palace officials. Lord Chamberlain's office received hundreds of angry phone calls from British citizens demanding explanations. The palace switchboard was overwhelmed with complaints from people who viewed the dismissal as an attack on British tradition and values. International media picked up the story, with CNN, Fox News, and other major networks questioning the stability of the British monarchy. Royal experts appeared on television programs expressing shock and predicting serious consequences. For the royal family's reputation, Prince William's office remained silent despite mounting pressure for a statement. His communications team was reportedly in crisis mode, trying to develop a response that could contain the growing scandal. By midnight, online petitions demanding the reinstatement of the Royal Guard had gathered over 100,000 signatures. Social media hashtags like "Bring Back the Guard" and "Why Royal Betrayal" were trending worldwide. The dismissed guards' families began speaking to journalists, sharing heartbreaking stories of multi-generational service to the crown. These personal accounts added emotional weight to the growing public outcry and made the situation even more difficult for the royal family to manage. As the first day of the crisis drew to a close, it became clear that Prince William's decision had unleashed forces beyond his control. The palace was facing its worst public relations disaster in decades, and the consequences were only beginning to unfold. The second day brought even more devastating revelations. Investigative journalists began digging deeper into the circumstances surrounding the Royal Guard dismissal. What they discovered would shake the monarchy to its core. Rebecca Walsh, an award-winning reporter for The Guardian, received an anonymous tip that led her to a shocking discovery. The private security company that replaced the Royal Guard was owned by a shell corporation, with ties to Prince William's personal business interests. The security company, called Britannia Protection Services, had been registered just 3 months earlier. Corporate records showed complex ownership structures designed to hide the true beneficiaries. However, Walsh's investigation revealed financial connections that led directly back to investment funds associated with Prince William. Even more damaging was the revelation about the cost. The Royal Guard's annual budget was approximately £2 million. The new private security contract was worth £15 million per year, representing a massive increase in expenses that British taxpayers would ultimately bear. Captain Morrison was contacted by several journalists seeking his reaction to these revelations. Initially reluctant to speak publicly, he finally agreed to an interview after learning about the financial connections. "We were told this was about modernization and efficiency," Morrison told the BBC. "Now we discover it was actually about enriching certain individuals while destroying a centuries-old institution. This isn't just betrayal of the guards who served faithfully. This is betrayal of the British people." The financial scandal attracted the attention of parliamentary investigators. Members of parliament from both major parties demanded a full investigation into the procurement process and any potential conflicts of interest. Opposition leader Sir Keir Starmer called for Prince William to appear before Parliament to explain his actions. The British people deserve answers about how their money is being spent and whether members of the royal family are profiting from decisions that affect public services. Inside the palace, emergency meetings were held throughout the day. Palace lawyers worked frantically to review the legal implications of the security contract and any potential violations of royal protocols or financial regulations. The Queen's health reportedly deteriorated as the stress of the scandal took its toll. Palace physicians were called to attend to her, and there were whispers among staff about her ability to handle such intense pressure at her advanced age. Prince William's wife, Catherine, was seen leaving the palace looking visibly distressed. Sources close to the royal family suggested that she had urged her husband to reverse his decision, but he remained defiant despite the mounting criticism. The dismissed royal guards organized themselves into an advocacy group, hiring legal representation to explore their options for challenging the dismissal. Their lawyer announced plans to file wrongful termination lawsuits and to request parliamentary hearings on their treatment. Public protests began forming outside Buckingham Palace. Hundreds of supporters gathered to show solidarity with the dismissed guards and to demand transparency about the security contract. Police had to establish barriers to manage the growing crowds. The scandal reached international proportions when the European Union announced it was monitoring the situation due to concerns about governance and transparency in British institutions. This added diplomatic pressure to the already overwhelming domestic criticism. As evening approached, rumors circulated that senior members of the royal family were considering extraordinary measures to address the crisis. The palace remained officially silent, but insiders suggested that dramatic action might be necessary to save the monarchy's reputation. The second day ended with the scandal dominating news cycles across the globe and the royal family facing questions about their very survival as a respected institution. The third day brought the most shocking revelation yet. A former palace insider speaking anonymously to the Times revealed that Prince William had been under investigation by internal palace security for suspicious financial activities for the past 6 months. The whistleblower, identified only as a senior palace official with direct knowledge of the situation, provided documents showing that Prince William had been making unauthorized communications with foreign business interests. The security contract was allegedly part of a larger scheme to redirect royal funds through private companies. This revelation sent shockwaves through the government. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak called an emergency cabinet meeting to discuss the constitutional crisis that was rapidly developing. The possibility that a future king might be involved in financial misconduct raised serious questions about the monarchy's future. The Archbishop of Canterbury, as the senior religious figure in the UK, issued a rare public statement calling for truth, transparency, and accountability in addressing the crisis. His words carried enormous weight and suggested that even the Church of England was distancing itself from Prince William. Captain Morrison and several other dismissed guards were invited to testify before a hastily convened parliamentary committee. Their testimony was devastating. They described a pattern of unusual behavior from Prince William in the months leading up to their dismissal. His Royal Highness had been asking strange questions about our security protocols, Morrison testified. He wanted detailed information about our schedules, our financial arrangements, and our reporting structures. At the time, we assumed he was simply taking a more active interest in palace operations. The guards also revealed that they had been ordered to sign new confidentiality agreements just weeks before their dismissal. These agreements contained unusually strict penalties for discussing palace operations, suggesting that the dismissal had been planned well in advance. More disturbing testimony emerged about the new security company's performance. The private contractors had already failed several security tests, leaving the palace vulnerable to potential threats. Their lack of training in royal protocols had created embarrassing situations during public ceremonies. International allies began expressing concern about the situation. The Canadian Prime Minister, whose country recognizes the British monarch as head of state, requested private briefings about the stability of the monarchy. Similar concerns were raised by other Commonwealth nations. Financial markets reacted negatively to the ongoing crisis. The British pound weakened against major currencies as investors worried about political instability. Tourism industry representatives expressed fears that the scandal could damage Britain's international reputation and reduce visitor numbers. The Queen's private secretary announced that Her Majesty would address the nation in a rare television broadcast. This unprecedented step indicated the severity of the crisis and the palace's recognition that extraordinary measures were needed to restore public confidence. Meanwhile, Prince William remained largely out of public view. Sources close to him suggested that he was consulting with private lawyers about his legal exposure and considering his options for responding to the mounting allegations. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, was reportedly struggling to maintain her public duties while dealing with the family crisis. Several of her scheduled appearances were quietly cancelled, fueling speculation about tension within the royal family. The dismissed royal guards received an outpouring of public support. A crowdfunding campaign to support them raised over £500,000 in just 24 hours. Military veterans organizations rallied to their cause, organizing demonstrations and lobbying efforts. Legal experts appearing on television programs warned that Prince William could face criminal charges if the allegations of financial misconduct were proven true. The possibility of a future king being prosecuted for fraud represented an unprecedented constitutional crisis. As the third day concluded, the monarchy faced its greatest challenge since the abdication crisis of 1936. The very foundations of the institution were being questioned, and the future of the royal family hung in the balance. The Queen's television address was scheduled for 8 o'clock in the evening, but 2 hours before the broadcast, an even more explosive development occurred. Prince Harry, speaking from his home in California, released a public statement that would change everything. In his statement, Prince Harry revealed that he had been secretly working with palace investigators for months, providing evidence of his brother's financial misconduct. The younger prince disclosed that he had discovered the scheme during a family gathering and had been cooperating with authorities ever since. "My duty to the crown and to the British people supersedes family loyalty," Harry stated in his written declaration. "I cannot stand by while the institution our grandmother has devoted her life to serving is destroyed by greed and corruption." Harry's revelation included specific details about offshore bank accounts, forged documents, and a network of shell companies that Prince William had allegedly used to siphon royal funds. The evidence was comprehensive and devastating. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. Within minutes of Harry's statement being released, Prince William's legal team announced that their client would be temporarily stepping back from all royal duties, pending a full investigation. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, was photographed leaving Kensington Palace with their children, reportedly heading to her parents' home in Berkshire. Palace sources confirmed that she had been completely unaware of her husband's activities and was devastated by the revelations. The Queen's scheduled address was postponed as palace officials scrambled to respond to the rapidly evolving situation. Royal aides worked frantically to assess the full scope of the crisis and develop an appropriate response. Captain Morrison, watching the developments from his home, felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. "We dedicated our lives to protecting the crown," he told reporters. "To learn that we were dismissed to cover up criminal activity is heartbreaking, but at least now the truth is coming out." The Financial Crimes Unit of the Metropolitan Police announced that they were opening a formal investigation into Prince William's activities. This marked the first time in modern history that a direct heir to the throne had become the subject of a criminal investigation, parliamentary. Leaders from all major parties called for an emergency session to address the constitutional crisis. Legal scholars debated whether Prince William could be stripped of his position in the line of succession if criminal charges were filed. The international reaction was swift and severe. The President of France canceled a planned state visit to Britain, citing concerns about the stability of British institutions. The German Chancellor issued a statement expressing deep concern about the situation. Financial markets went into freefall as the full implications of the crisis became clear. The Bank of England was forced to issue a statement assuring international partners that British financial institutions remained stable despite the royal scandal. Prince William's business associates began distancing themselves from him as quickly as possible. Several companies announced they were severing ties with any organizations connected to him, and investors began withdrawing from funds that had any association with his interests. The new security company at the center of the scandal announced it was terminating its contract with the palace and returning all payments received. The company's executives claimed they had been unaware of any impropriety and were cooperating fully with investigators. Social media erupted with calls for Prince William to be arrested and prosecuted like any other citizen. The hashtag #ArrestWilliam began trending worldwide as public anger reached unprecedented levels. The dismissed royal guards were formally invited to return to their positions by the palace's emergency management team. However, many indicated they would need time to consider whether they could trust the institution again after being used as pawns in a criminal scheme. As midnight approached, Britain faced its greatest constitutional crisis in living memory. The monarchy's survival was no longer guaranteed, and the future of the nation's political system hung in the balance. The palace remained in lockdown mode, with all normal operations suspended as staff struggled to comprehend the magnitude of the scandal that had engulfed the royal family. The fourth day began with the most shocking development yet. At dawn, armed police officers arrived at Kensington Palace with a warrant for Prince William's arrest. The future king was taken into custody on charges of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to defraud the public. The arrest was conducted with unprecedented secrecy, but news leaked within hours. Images of Prince William in handcuffs being led to a police vehicle spread across social media before any official announcement was made. The Queen, now facing the collapse of everything she had worked to protect for over 70 years, was rushed to hospital with what palace officials described as stress-related health complications. Her condition was serious enough that all senior royals were summoned to be by her bedside. Prince Charles, as heir apparent, was forced to take immediate control of royal affairs during this unprecedented crisis. His first action was to authorize the complete reinstatement of the dismissed royal guards with full honors and back pay. Captain Morrison received the call personally from Prince Charles's private secretary. "Your service to the crown has been exemplary," the message conveyed. "The royal family apologizes for the injustice you have suffered and requests your immediate return to duty." However, Morrison and many of his fellow guards were conflicted about returning. The trust they had placed in the institution had been shattered. "How can we protect a family that was willing to sacrifice us to hide criminal activity?" Morrison asked during a press conference. The legal proceedings against Prince William moved rapidly. Prosecutors revealed evidence of a scheme that had diverted over £20 million from royal accounts over a 2-year period. The money had been funneled through the security contract and other fraudulent arrangements. International law enforcement agencies confirmed they were investigating similar schemes in other countries where Prince William had business interests. The scope of the alleged criminal enterprise was far larger than initially suspected. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, released her own statement through her lawyers. She announced she was filing for divorce and seeking full custody of their children. "I cannot allow my children to be associated with criminal behavior," her statement read. The constitutional implications became staggering. Legal experts debated whether someone under criminal indictment could ever ascend to the throne. Parliament began emergency discussions about potentially altering the succession laws. Public opinion polls showed that support for the monarchy had plummeted to historic lows. Nearly 60% of British citizens now favored abolishing the monarchy entirely and establishing a republic. The Commonwealth. Nations began seriously discussing whether to break their ties with the British crown. Australia and Canada scheduled emergency parliamentary sessions to consider removing the monarch as their head of state. Prince Harry's role as a whistleblower earned him praise from some quarters, but also criticism from those who viewed his actions as a betrayal of family loyalty. He gave a televised interview explaining his decision to expose his brother's crimes. "I had to choose between family and country," Harry said during the emotional interview. "My grandmother devoted her entire life to serving the British people. I couldn't let her legacy be destroyed by one person's greed." The dismissed royal guards organized a public ceremony to honor their years of faithful service. Thousands of supporters attended, including many military veterans who viewed the guards as symbols of duty and honor. The ceremony became a powerful demonstration of public support for traditional values and institutional integrity. Captain Morrison delivered a speech that moved many attendees to tears. "We served not for personal gain but for the honor of protecting something greater than ourselves," Morrison declared. "That commitment remains unchanged, regardless of how we have been treated." Financial investigators revealed that the stolen money had been used to purchase luxury properties, expensive artwork, and to fund lavish personal expenses. The contrast between Prince William's extravagant lifestyle and the modest salaries of the guards he dismissed created additional public outrage. As the fourth day ended, Britain faced fundamental questions about its future. The monarchy that had provided stability for over 1,000 years was crumbling, and no one could predict what would emerge from the ruins. The palace announced that the Queen's condition had stabilized, But doctors warned that the stress of the crisis continued to pose serious risks to her health. The nation held its breath, waiting to see if their beloved monarch would survive the greatest scandal in royal history. 6 months later, the dust had finally begun to settle on the greatest royal scandal in British history. Prince William had been convicted on all charges and sentenced to 12 years in prison. The man who would have been king was now serving time in a maximum security facility. The Queen, despite her advanced age and the tremendous stress of the crisis, had survived and shown remarkable resilience. However, she announced her decision to abdicate in favor of Prince Charles, stating that the monarchy needed new leadership to restore public trust. Prince Charles's coronation was a subdued affair compared to traditional royal ceremonies. The focus was on accountability, transparency, and service rather than pageantry. He used his first address as king to apologize personally to the dismissed royal guards and to promise comprehensive reforms. Captain Morrison had accepted the invitation to return to royal service, but with new conditions. The Royal Guard was given enhanced independence and direct reporting relationships to Parliament to prevent future political interference. Morrison was promoted to Chief of Royal Security, a newly created position with significant authority. "We're not just ceremonial figures anymore," Morrison explained to new recruits. "We're guardians of institutional integrity. Our duty is to the Crown as a symbol of British values, not to any individual who might abuse their position." The financial damage from Prince William's crimes had been substantial, but most of the stolen money was recovered through asset seizures. The funds were used to establish a charitable foundation supporting military veterans and their families. Catherine had successfully obtained her divorce and custody of the children. She chose to retain her title but stepped back from public duties to focus on raising her family away from the spotlight. The children were being educated privately, shielded from the ongoing media attention surrounding their father's crimes. Prince Harry's role in exposing the scandal had initially made him a controversial figure, but public opinion eventually shifted in his favor. He was invited to resume a limited role in royal duties, though he chose to remain in California with his own family. The constitutional crisis had led to significant reforms in how the monarchy operated. New laws required financial disclosure for all senior royals, independent oversight of royal spending, and clear procedures for removing someone from the line of succession if they were convicted of serious crimes. Parliament had ultimately decided to maintain the monarchy but with drastically reduced powers and increased accountability. The institution survived, but it was fundamentally transformed by the crisis. The dismissed guards became symbols of integrity and faithful service in the face of corruption. Several were invited to share their stories at military academies and leadership training programs. Their experience became a case study in how to maintain ethical standards under pressure. Tourism to Britain actually increased as international visitors came to see the palace and learn about the dramatic events that had unfolded. The story had become part of British history, and people were fascinated by how the ancient institution had survived and adapted. The private security company at the center of the scandal was dissolved, and several of its executives faced criminal charges for their role in the scheme. The case led to stricter regulations on government contracting and conflict of interest rules. Public trust in the monarchy slowly began to recover under King Charles's leadership. His emphasis on transparency and service, combined with the comprehensive reforms that had been implemented, convinced many British citizens that the institution could be reformed rather than abolished. Captain Morrison often reflected on the extraordinary events that had transformed his life and his country. What had begun as a routine mourning of royal duty had led to the exposure of the biggest scandal in royal history and ultimately to positive changes that strengthened British democracy. The Royal Guard continued to protect the crown, but they now did so with enhanced authority and public respect. They had proven that sometimes the greatest service to an institution requires challenging those who would corrupt it. The palace had been left in disgrace by Prince William's actions, but it had ultimately emerged stronger and more accountable. The crisis had tested the resilience of British institutions and demonstrated that even the oldest and most traditional organizations could adapt and reform when necessary. As Captain Morrison stood guard at Buckingham Palace on a quiet morning, he reflected on how much had changed. The crown he protected represented the same values of duty and service, but it was now backed by systems that would prevent future abuse. The disgrace had been transformed into an opportunity for renewal and reform.